7 countries just raised the price of your retirement, and number one didn't just raise the bar, it moved it completely out of reach. If you've been dreaming about retiring abroad, living somewhere warm, affordable, maybe with a little more adventure in your life, what I'm about to share with you could completely change your plan. Because the world you researched 2 years ago, it's not the same world anymore. Prices have changed. Requirements have changed. And if you're still working off old information, you could show up to your dream country with the wrong budget, the wrong documents, and zero backup plan. So stay with me through this entire video because I'm going to walk you through all 7 countries, tell you exactly what changed, what it costs now in 2026, and most importantly, what you can actually do about it. Let's get into it. Number 7, Colombia. Okay, let's start with Colombia. And I want to be real with you right away because Colombia is one of those places that gets talked about constantly in the expat community. You've probably heard it 100 times. Colombia is dirt cheap. I can retire there on $1,000 a month. And honestly, a few years ago that wasn't completely crazy to say. Medellin became this whole phenomenon. Cartagena, the coffee region, the coast, beautiful places, warm people, and a cost of living that made retirees feel like they were living large on a modest social security check. But here's where people are making a serious mistake in 2026. Colombia's pension visa, the one designed specifically for retirees, is not based on a flat number that someone made up. It's tied directly to something called the SMMLV, which is Colombia's national minimum wage. And the Colombian government adjusts that minimum wage every single year, sometimes by a little, sometimes by a lot. And when they raise it, your visa requirement goes up automatically, whether you knew about it or not. Right now, in 2026, that requirement sits at roughly 3 times the minimum wage, which puts the income threshold somewhere between $1,400 and $1,600 a month, depending on where the exchange rate lands when you're applying. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. That's not that bad. I get more than that from Social Security. And if you do, great. Colombia is still a genuinely strong option. The cost of living is still relatively affordable compared to most of Europe or Southeast Asia's premium spots. The food is incredible. The climate in places like Medellin is practically perfect year-round. The expat community is established and welcoming. So if you're above that threshold, don't count Colombia out. But here's the part that stings for a lot of people. The average Social Security benefit in the United States right now sits around $1,900 a month, but that's the average. Plenty of retirees, especially those who retired early, had gaps in their work history or worked in lower income jobs, are getting closer to $1,200, $1,300, maybe just touching $1,400. And for those folks, the margin is razor thin. One bad exchange rate day, one small miscalculation, and suddenly you don't qualify. The fix here, if you're right on the edge, is to look at supplementing your income. Some retirees combine their Social Security with a small pension, an annuity payout, or rental income back home. Colombia will accept a combination of income sources. It doesn't all have to come from one place. So, if you're a few $100s short, don't give up immediately. Talk to an immigration attorney who specializes in Colombian visas and see if there's a legal documented way to bridge that gap. But the core message here is this. Stop assuming Colombia is automatically cheap and easy. Do the math with current numbers, not the numbers you read in some blog post from 2021. Number 6, Mexico. All right, moving right along, and now we're going to talk about Mexico. And Mexico is a special case because it is so close, so accessible, so deeply woven into the American cultural consciousness that people genuinely underestimate how much it's changed. Mexico is right next door. The visa must be easy. That's the assumption. And look, I get it. Millions of Americans have second homes there. People cross the border all the time. There's a massive, well-established expat scene in places like Puerto Vallarta, San Miguel de Allende, Oaxaca, the Riviera Maya. Mexico feels familiar in a way that, say, Portugal or Thailand might not. But familiar doesn't mean simple anymore. Mexico doesn't have a dedicated retirement visa the way some countries do. What most retirees are applying for is a temporary resident visa. And the income requirements to get one have gone up significantly. We're now talking about roughly $2,700 to $3,000 per month, depending on which consulate you apply through. And that last part, depending on which consulate, that's the thing that catches people completely off guard. In Mexico, each consulate sets its own thresholds based on their interpretation of the requirements. The consulate in Los Angeles might have a different number than the consulate in Dallas, which might be different again from the one in Chicago. This creates this bizarre situation where two people with the exact same income could get completely different results simply based on which consulate they walked into. One person gets approved, the other gets denied, and neither of them fully understands why. On top of the income thresholds, enforcement is stricter. Banks are asking more questions. Landlords in popular expat areas have raised rents substantially. The days of showing up with a tourist visa, finding an apartment for $400, and figuring out the paperwork later, those days are getting harder to pull off. So what's the fix? First, research consulates strategically before you apply. This is not cheating the system. This is just understanding how the system actually works. Some expat forums and immigration attorneys track which consulates are currently using lower thresholds. Apply through the most favorable one you can reasonably access. Second, if you're on the fence about timing, lean toward applying sooner rather than later. The trend in Mexico, just like everywhere on this list, is thresholds going up over time. If you qualify today, there is no strategic reason to wait. Number 5, Ecuador. Okay, Ecuador. And Ecuador is interesting because for years it was one of the most quietly excellent retirement destinations on the planet. Cuenca, that colonial city up in the Andes, had this incredible reputation as an expat paradise. Affordable healthcare, beautiful architecture, mild weather, and a visa that was genuinely accessible to almost anyone collecting Social Security. The myth that lived on forever was this: I only need $800 a month to retire in Ecuador. And there was a time, not even that long ago, when that was essentially true. Ecuador's pensionado visa used to have a very low bar. Here's what's changed. Ecuador's retirement visa is now tied to 3 times the country's basic salary, which they call the SBU. And with the 2026 increases to that baseline, you're now looking at a requirement of roughly $1,400 to $1,450 a month. The number keeps drifting upward year after year as Ecuador adjusts its basic salary, which, to be fair, they do for legitimate economic reasons. But the effect for retirees is that the goalpost keeps moving. Here's the thing though, and I want to give credit where it's due, most Social Security recipients do still qualify for Ecuador. If you're getting $1,900, $2,000 or more per month, you're comfortably above the threshold. Ecuador remains one of the genuinely accessible options on this list. But there's a detail that absolutely blindsides couples. If you're bringing a dependent, a spouse, a partner, you need to add roughly $250 per month to that base requirement. So if you're a couple, and you're both planning to live on one person's Social Security income, you're now looking at needing $1,600 to $1,700 a month, which is still very doable, but it is meaningfully different from the $800 myth that's still floating around the internet. The other thing worth noting is that Ecuador uses the US dollar as its official currency. For American retirees, this is actually a huge deal because you're not playing games with exchange rates. What you earn is what you spend. No conversion anxiety, no watching the dollar collapse against some local currency. Ecuador isn't as sensationally exciting as some other destinations. It doesn't have Thailand's beaches or Portugal's wine bars. But for pure value and accessibility, it's still holding up better than most of the countries on this list. Number 4, Portugal. Now we're getting into the territory where things get really interesting, and honestly, a little heartbreaking for a lot of people who've been dreaming about Europe. Portugal. Beautiful, safe, English-friendly, amazing food, Atlantic coastline, centuries of history. For about a decade, Portugal was the answer that when someone asked, where in Europe can I afford to retire? The D7 visa, the passive income visa, became almost legendary in the expat world. And the golden visa was the golden ticket for those with more money to invest. The mistake people are still making is thinking Portugal is the same deal it was in 2019 or 2020. Let's start with the D7 visa. The income requirement itself is actually tied to Portugal's minimum wage, which has been rising. Right now, you're looking at roughly 820 to 920 euros per month as the base income requirement. Call it about 900 to 1,000 US dollars at current rates. On paper, that sounds manageable, right? But here's where people get blindsided. That number is just the visa requirement. That is not what it actually costs to live in Portugal in 2026, Lisbon and Porto, the two cities most expats dream about, have seen property prices and rents explode over the last 5 years. What used to rent for €600 a month in Lisbon is now easily $1,200 to $1,500, and that's if you can find something available. The rental market is genuinely tight. Then there's health insurance. Portugal requires private health insurance for your D7 visa, and for a retiree in their 60s or older, that can run anywhere from €2,000 to €4,000 per year. Sometimes more, depending on your age and health history. You need to factor that in before you fall in love with a number that only covers the visa requirement. Now let's talk about the golden visa, because this is where the truly significant change happened. The classic golden visa route: buy a property in Portugal for €500,000 or less, get residency. That path is essentially gone. The Portuguese government restructured the program, and the real estate investment route has been eliminated in most cases. What remains requires investment through approved funds or alternative vehicles, often at the €500,000 level or above, and with far less flexibility than the old property route offered. This wasn't a small tweak. This was a complete overhaul. If you had a financial plan built around buying a small villa in the Alentejo and getting residency through the golden visa, you need to go back to the drawing board. The D7 is still Portugal's most viable path for regular retirees. It works, but you need to budget honestly, not just for the visa requirement, but for what life in Portugal actually costs in 2026. If you're receiving $2,000 to $2,500 a month from Social Security and have some savings, you can make it work. If you're cutting it thin, start with a longer-term trial visit before you commit. Number 3, Thailand. Alright, Thailand. And I have to say, Thailand holds a very specific place in the hearts of a certain type of retiree. There's almost a romance to it. The temples, the street food, the islands, the pace of life. I can live like a king in Thailand for $1,500 a month. You've heard it, maybe you've said it, and there's still truth to the lifestyle part. Thailand genuinely delivers an extraordinary quality of life at a cost that Western countries simply cannot compete with. The food culture alone is worth the price of admission. But the visa side of the equation has become significantly more complicated, and the financial requirements are higher than a lot of people realize. Here's what Thailand's retirement visa actually requires in 2026. Option 1, you maintain 800,000 Thai baht in a Thai bank account. At current exchange rates, that's roughly $22,000 to $25,000. And here's the kicker. That money has to sit in a Thai bank, not an American bank, not a brokerage account back home. A Thai bank account with the funds deposited and held there. For some retirees, that is genuinely fine. But understand what you're signing up for. That money is effectively tied up in the Thai banking system. It's not invested, it's not earning meaningful interest. It just sits there as a deposit proving you can support yourself. Option 2, show monthly income or pension of around $1,800 to $2,000 per month. This sounds simpler, but the documentation requirements can be complex, especially for income that comes from multiple sources. Then there's health insurance. Thailand has been tightening requirements around health coverage for visa holders, and enforcement varies but is generally trending stricter. You need coverage, and that adds to your annual costs. And then there's the Thailand Privilege Program, which you might know as the old Elite Visa. This used to be a relatively straightforward long-term stay option at a premium price. Now it's been restructured, rebranded, and repriced, starting at around $18,000 and going significantly higher depending on the tier you choose. The Thailand retirement visa is still absolutely viable for retirees who go in with clear eyes and a proper financial plan. But the days of showing up to Chiang Mai with $1,500 a month and just figuring it out on the fly, those days are getting harder to sustain as requirements tighten. The most reliable path remains the bank deposit route. Lock up that $25,000, maintain the account properly, keep your documentation clean, and you can live beautifully in Thailand for the long term. Just don't treat that deposit money as a flexible resource. Number 2, Greece. Now we're in the top 2, and Greece at number 2 genuinely surprised a lot of people when they found out how dramatically things changed. Greece has had a bit of a moment in the last few years. After the economic crisis, after years of bad press, the country started finding its footing again. Tourism exploded. Remote workers discovered Athens. Expats started talking about Thessaloniki, Crete, the Peloponnese. and Greece started positioning itself as a premier European retirement destination. Then came the golden visa changes, and they were massive. Greece used to have one of the most accessible golden visa programs in Europe, 250,000 euros in real estate, done. Residency secured. For a lot of middle-income retirees with some savings or home equity, that was actually within reach. Now, in most desirable areas, Athens, Thessaloniki, certain islands and coastal zones, the threshold jumped to 800,000 euros. Even in less popular regions, it's 400,000. That's not a minor adjustment. That's the government essentially saying, we want wealthy investors. We're not playing in the accessible middle tier anymore. For regular retirees, the remaining option is something called the FIP visa, the Financially Independent Person visa. And the concept is good. Show that you have passive income of around 2,000 euros per month, demonstrate that you won't need to work in Greece, and you can build your life there legally. But the execution has some real friction. Processing times can stretch. The documentation requirements are detailed. And unlike some countries where the rules feel stable and predictable, Greece has shown a willingness to change things with relatively little notice. What's true today might not be true when you're 6 months into your application process. If Greece is your dream, and I completely understand why it would be, the FIP visa is still the path forward for most retirees. 2,000 euros per month in passive income is the realistic bar. If you're there, it's worth pursuing. If you're not, start building toward it with intention. But I'd also say this. Go into a Greece application knowing that you're playing a longer game with more variables than somewhere like Portugal or Ecuador. Build in time buffer. Work with a local immigration attorney who is in the loop on current processing realities, not someone who last handled a Greek FIP application 2 years ago. Number 1, Malaysia. And here we are. Number 1. The country that didn't just raise its requirements, it essentially reinvented its entire retirement program and in doing so, shut the door on the people who needed it most. Malaysia's My Second Home program, MM2H, was for years considered the gold standard of retirement visas in Southeast Asia, maybe in the entire world for a certain type of retiree. Affordable country, incredible food, good healthcare, English widely spoken, infrastructure that actually works. And for years, the requirements were genuinely accessible. Moderate income, modest deposit, and you were in. Then, the Malaysian government, citing a desire to attract higher value residents, restructured the entire program. And when I say restructured, I mean they went back to the drawing board and came up with something almost unrecognizable. The new MM2H structure has multiple tiers. The specific numbers can shift, but the broad strokes are sobering. Offshore income requirements have climbed to levels that are several $1,000s per month. Fixed deposit requirements can exceed 100,000 US dollars depending on the tier. And the criteria for who qualifies has fundamentally shifted upward in every direction. Here's the brutal reality for a lot of retirees who had Malaysia as their plan. The average Social Security benefit in the United States is around $1,900 a month. For a lot of retirees, that is their retirement. That's their income. And under the new MM2H structure, $1,900 a month may simply not be enough. Not even close to the top tier. Not even enough for the entry-level tier in a lot of cases. Malaysia didn't just raise the bar, they moved the program into a different category entirely. They're competing for high net worth individuals now, people who would also qualify for Singapore's programs or Dubai's long-term residency. That is a completely different audience than the school teacher from Ohio who saved carefully for 30 years and wanted to spend their golden years on Penang Island. And here's what makes it especially frustrating. There isn't really a practical workaround for most people. This isn't like Colombia where you can supplement your income by a few $100s. This isn't like Mexico where you can shop consulates strategically. The restructuring was so fundamental that for average income retirees, Malaysia has essentially moved off the board. If you had Malaysia as your plan A, you need a new plan A. Full stop. The good news, and I do want to end this section on something actionable, is that better alternatives still exist in the region. Thailand, which we already covered, remains accessible with proper planning. The Philippines has a retirement visa program that is still genuinely affordable and designed with regular retirees in mind. If Southeast Asia is the dream, it's not over. It just doesn't run through Kuala Lumpur the way it used to. The bigger picture, what's actually happening here? This isn't a coincidence. 7 countries raising their bars at the same time, that's a pattern. Inflation hit everywhere. When a country ties its visa requirement to its local minimum wage and that wage goes up, your threshold goes up automatically. No warning. The rule just changed. Colombia, Ecuador, Portugal aren't targeting you personally. Economics moved, and you moved with it. Then there's political pressure. Lisbon, Medellin, Chiang Mai. Locals started noticing. Rents went up, neighborhoods changed. When voters complain that foreigners are pricing them out, governments tighten. Every single time, and the most calculated piece, governments figured out these programs are a revenue tool. Why accept someone on a modest social security check when you can restructure for millionaires instead? Malaysia made that choice openly. Greece followed. Others are watching. The window is narrowing. People acting on current information today will have choices that people waiting 2 more years simply won't. What you should do right now. Throw out your old research, that blog post from 2022. Outdated. Requirements are moving fast and only current numbers matter. Do the full math, not just the visa math. The income requirement is the floor. Add housing, health insurance, and an emergency buffer. If it works, amazing. If it doesn't, better to know now than after booking a one-way flight. There are still great options out there. Countries where Social Security stretches, where the visa is realistic, where the lifestyle actually delivers. Go and watch this video right here. The best remaining affordable retirement destinations still working in 2026, because today proved these lists don't stay the same forever.